Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, boolers, shills, deaths, lace peasants, vassals, mercenaries. I'm a useful idiot, and today I would like to talk about private armies. And there has been an explosion in the private military corporation industry in the last 20 to 30 years. And it's now a $120 billion a year industry. It's the fastest growing industry in the global economy. And they operate in 50 different countries now, and this is all part of the post-Cold War era, and that's part of the catalyst for this new private military industry was the vacuum left by the giant standing armies facing off during the Cold War, and also the post-Cold War military reduction in the 90s helped fuel this industry, and in some cases entire units became the basis for new private military corporations. And part of this quotient as well is the fact that the U.S. and the U.K. did not sign the 1989 United Nations Mercenary Convention, which outlaws the uses of mercenaries. But that's all right, because they could bypass that anyway. Michael Stock, head of one of these mercenary groups, head of Bancroft Global Development, strongly objects to the term, quote, mercenary, unquote. Michael Stock says that they prefer to be called, quote, non-governmental organizations dedicated to finding permanent solutions to violent conflict, unquote. So nice way with words there, Mr. Stock. So anyway, they prefer the term security rather than mercenary. And this whole concept of private armies, of course, came to the fore during the Iraq War and during the Afghanistan occupation. And in 2006 alone, Iraq had over 100,000 of these so-called contractors and or mercenaries. So their numbers are right up there with the amount of military involved in these theaters. In fact, according to Jeremy Scahill, 250,000 contractors between Iraq and Afghanistan. 50% of our total fighting force in Iraq and Afghanistan is made up of mercenaries. 130,000 are in Iraq, and there's been a 23% increase from the Bush to the Obama administration. So this is another example of what we say when we say that Obama is not exactly getting America out of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's just transferring the power over to more and more contractors. And the fact that there's been a 23% increase in mercenaries in Iraq since Obama took office shows that he's just going to replace the U.S. military with more contractors. And there's been a 29% increase in Afghanistan. So as U.S. troops pull out in 2014, there'll still be a very formidable military force in place there representing the United States. And of course the embassy in Baghdad is the size of 80 football fields, so it takes a fair amount of security, 7,000 alone just for security in that building. And the Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan has just been expanded, $60 million worth, so that will require also tens of thousands of subcontractors or mercenaries. And of course, during our occupation of Iraq, Blackwater took the limelight for a lot of reckless behavior and lascivious behavior on top of that. And in fact, in Abu Ghraib, all the translators and half the interrogators were subcontractors. And so people are familiar with this culture from Blackwater. And of course, they've had a lot of problems, so they changed their name twice. They are now known as Academy, and are still operating. And they're still operating in Iraq as well. So there's a lot of reasons why the government is moving in this direction. Of course, I referenced you to an earlier video I did on the future military is here. And part of that is going to be these drone culture, and part of it is going to be less large conventional forces in mass and smaller mobile units throughout the globe. And of course, hiring contractors and mercenaries. It's much more efficient than fielding U.S. troops with all the pitfalls of having to answer to Congress and the American people and have any consistency in your foreign policy. Now, with the drones, just like with the drones, we can have contractors and or mercenaries operating in all sorts of countries where we are not officially or legally at war or involved in hostilities. So, but governments like them because they can no longer depend on citizen armies to carry off the duties and unsavory activities required, and they also have an entire world as their recruiting ground, and this has been proven by a number of different private armies that recruit strictly from Latin America. So then we have a link to corporate profits to war escalation. So corporations now have a direct and even more direct interest in perpetuating war in hostile environments because they make a lot of profits. And these private armies also can undermine and violate sovereignty, which of course U.S. troops cannot do under normal processes. So we're going to see the proliferation of corporate armies as time goes on, and we've seen that explosion already. As I say, once I started doing a little investigation, I was surprised at how many different organizations that are private military corporations, private security corporations, and they number in the hundreds, if not thousands at this point. So let me run down some of the top 10 private armies in the world. Of course, the number one is the G4S, and they operate in 125 different countries. They have 625,000 employees. They're the largest private employer in the world, second largest private employer in the world behind Walmart. So that gives you an idea of the scale of this industry and the requirements. And they do a lot of bank, prison, and airport security, but in the year 2009, they bought the company Armor Guard with 9,000 soldiers, and now can provide heavily armed security, military intelligence, land mine clearance, and training. So they're working on a vast scale. And in fact, now they handle half of all non-military supply convoys in Iraq. So that's G4S. Then we have the Unity Resources Group. That's a 1,200-man private army out of Australia. They operate in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and recently helped in the elections in Lebanon. So we see a lot of these private armies getting lucrative contracts in areas like Africa and Latin America and Asia. So that trend will continue. Then we have a company called Armies. They guard all the oil wells in Iraq. They have 282 sites in Iraq that they guard with 16,000-man private army. And they are also involved in Africa guarding iron ore, gas, and oil projects. And this is another thing we see consistently with these private armies, is they're guarding corporate sites around the globe, and generally having to do with energy and or resources and minerals. So another consistency. We have a private army of 600 that's run by the Karzai family in Afghanistan. They're called the Asia Security Group, and the U.S. government actually contracts to them, and we pay them to guard the Karzai family because the U.S. military is not enough. And then another one of the largest private armies in the world is DynCorp. They have a staff of 10,000. They're a U.S. company based in Virginia. They make $3.4 billion a year. Once again, they operate in Iraq, Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe. And they're one of 8 private firms that were chosen to remain in Iraq when U.S. forces leave. So here's another good example of what we're talking about. When U.S. forces pull out, there will be 8 private contracting companies, this one with a staff of 10,000, that will remain in Iraq long after U.S. troops are gone. So we are hardly going to be out of Iraq. Then another corporation is called Triple Canopy. They have 1,800 troops operating in Iraq. And they're mostly recruited from Uganda and Peru. And but they recently got a $1.5 billion Iraqi contract, so they're going to be another one of the companies that's going to stay behind in Iraq after U.S. troops leave. And they also have another 3,000 troops worldwide, so that's Triple Canopy. Then we have Aegis. Of course, we know about them. They have a staff of 5,000. They protect oil companies, United Nations installations, and work for the U.S. And one of the reasons why you may have heard of a number of these companies, of course, is because they all have a hard living lifestyle, shall we say. They live a life of debauchery in the field. And why not? They're well paid. Then we have a company called Defion International, and they recruit mostly in Latin America. Their headquarters is in Peru, and they operate in Dubai, Iraq, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. And then, of course, Blackwater, which is now known as Academy. They have the largest private training facility in the world for a private army. They have 20,000 troops. They have 20 aircraft and a fleet of armored vehicles. Probably the largest private army in the world. And the U.S. government even hired them to do some security work in the post-Katrina New Orleans. So they're used in catastrophe zones as well as war zones like Iraq. And there's not only all these American private armies, but of course there's private armies all over the world, particularly Britain, Australia, and the United States. And they're made up of a lot of ex-special forces people who can make, of course, 10 to 20 times the salary they ever made in the military. And like I mentioned earlier, they have quite the lifestyles. And of course, the advantages of these private armies, they have a tenuous national affiliation, so they can be put into all sorts of precarious situations. They are less likely to have to be acknowledged at all, so we can operate these private armies anywhere in the globe and never really have to mention it to anyone. And there's no accountability to government or private sector or the public. And then, of course, they operate with almost complete impunity, and in the field as well as at home. And that's where we have the pitfalls. Of course, what we've seen is a culture of depravity and a culture of killing for sport. And, of course, both of those would seem like bad qualities to most regular American citizens, but in the private army industry, that's quite a recruiting tool. So anyway, there's the lowdown on something that's exploded, particularly in the last 11 years since the post 9/11 world, but certainly the industry was well on its way through the 90s. So once again, we can thank several administrations in a row for helping to perpetuate this private industry, and something that the U.S. military and our State Department and our foreign policy depends on more and more, and that's outsourcing to private corporations all sorts of dirty work all over the globe. And of course, all these other countries, major countries, are also in on this trade. So in addition to all the warfare and all the fielded armies that everyone's aware of, you have to add this layer of private armies and mercenaries that are covering the globe with another layer of violence that is out there all the time that we don't read about in the papers every day. So there's a lot more going on out in the world than everyone suspects. I'm useful idiot. Don't you be one too.